5 persons were found brutally murdered in a home in a secluded area of Beverly Hills, including actress Sharon Tate.
A terrorist attack on 3 Tokyo subway lines during this morning's rush hour has so far killed at least 6 people.
I used to think that people would have to be mildly mentally ill or pretty severely mentally ill to be drawn into a cult. And I totally disagree with that now.
They allege that those who try to leave the colony are beaten and drugged.
It's also possible that the cult leader has raped dozens of children.
What these organized groups have evolved into is organizations of power, money, and sex.
The bodies were reported to be the victims of a mass suicide pact, though some had been murdered.
Passions and commitments that can be engendered by religion are extraordinarily powerful, and sometimes no other human beings can stand in their way.
Mass suicide, murder, child abuse, terrorism. Cults are synonymous with tragedy and disaster. But nobody sets out to join a cult. People join a new religion, work for a cause, or start a political movement. From the inside, the group is noble, inspirational, but then a line is crossed and a group becomes a cult.
It needs to have 3 characteristics to call it a cult. One is that the guru becomes worship rather than the broader religious principles.
Case file, Om Shinrikyo. Japanese cult leader Shoko Asahara convinced disciples that he was Christ reincarnated, and that they must surrender their will to his for ultimate salvation.
Another characteristic is that it has thought reform-like characteristics, that is, systematic indoctrination with a great focus on confession, criticism, self-criticism in a systematic way.
Case file, Jonestown. Jim Jones held all-night preaching sessions where cultists would be forced to confess their sins in public, so that Jones could issue brutal public beatings.
A third characteristic has to do with heavy exploitation from above, usually the guru himself or herself and other higher-ranking people, and that exploitation tends to be economic and sexual.
Case file, FLDS. May 2006. Cult leader Warren Jeffs is named one of America's 10 most wanted. His crime, as leader of the fundamentalist Latter-day Saints, a polygamous cult, Warren Jeffs stands accused of the rape and imprisonment of children. But even with their leader on the run from the law, the members of Jeff's cult see themselves as faithful followers of God, not a band of criminals. One man's cult is another man's religion. It has been that way since ancient times. 2,000 years ago, a carpenter, a prostitute, and 12 other outcasts started a cult that challenged all social values of the time. They believed their leader was God himself, that he had the power to walk on water and even rise from the dead. They believed he would form a new kingdom, and their obsession with revolution worried local authorities. For decades, followers of the Nazarene, called Christians, were viewed as a cult by the Roman authorities.
Christianity starts as a dissident movement within Judaism. So already there's tension between Judaism and the Jesus movement as it takes place. Certainly also, preaching about a kingdom is going to make the Romans nervous. They have a kingdom that they're happy with. So we have a charismatic leader with a message that challenges both religious and secular authorities.
It would take hundreds of years for Christianity to become a mainstream religion. In fact, many of the world's major religions, Buddhism, Islam, Mormonism, have come from similar roots. They have all endured the suspicion and persecution that comes with the label of cult.
I think people fear the cult because they fear difference in a lot of ways, and this is a manifestation of religious difference. Because religions often, if not invariably, claim to address the most important questions for human beings. When people come up with challenging, different answers to those types of questions, they threaten the status quo.
Most cults are nonviolent, and some have lost the label and become mainstream. Religion itself is not the problem, but cult leaders use religion to commit heinous and terrifying crimes. The kind of crimes that have led the FBI to hunt down Warren Jeffs, leader of the polygamous cult, FLDS. John Llewellyn, a former sex crime investigator with the Utah Sheriff's Office, has investigated several polygamous cults in Utah.
While I was a deputy sheriff, I was in charge of all the sex crimes. And the captain started giving me these complaints about polygamy. And I knew very little about polygamy, and so being a good detective, I started to read up on it so I'd know better how to handle these.
Several polygamous cults have spread throughout the western U.S., reaching a population of over 30,000. Though they split off from the mainstream Mormon church a century ago, they are erroneously referred to as Mormon fundamentalists. Both groups take their theology from the Book of Mormon and trace their faith back to the prophet Joseph Smith. But only the polygamous cults, as opposed to the Mormons, cut themselves off from society to hide their secret lifestyle. A lifestyle they practice because, according to their theology, it's the only path that leads to heaven.
And they believe that for every wife, they will have a world. They will be the God of every world, one for each wife. And that wife will be the Eve of that world. And it will only be the Mormons who will have sex in heaven.
As an undercover agent, Llewellyn expected to research polygamy as an outsider. But as he learned more, he and his wife soon found themselves in an unexpected position.
This lady with 3 little girls, a single mom, asked if we wouldn't adopt her children if something happened to her. So I told my wife, I said, let's tell her we're studying Mormon fundamentalism, polygamy, and that might discourage her. To my surprise, 2 weeks later, she came to my wife and asked if she couldn't be part of our family.
Llewellyn joined a polygamous cult, bringing a second wife into his home. Devotion to the cult had made him discard his lifelong Christian values.
I had no idea what it was going to be like to have 2 wives. I felt, you know, am I living in adultery? Or is it really permissible? So I struggled with that, but it wasn't a year or so. It almost seemed natural.
In Llewellyn's case, all 3 adults consented to the polygamous arrangement. But in many households of the FLDS, polygamy takes an even darker form.
Not all women are child brides in these polygamous households of the FLDS, but many are. Children as young as 12 or 14 are marriageable.
In the FLDS, Warren Jeffs routinely forces girls into marriages with men old enough to be their fathers. And in this cult of thousands, it's impossible to say how many girls have been forced to have sex against their will.
Up until the relatively recent present, there had been a period of turning a blind eye to what was going on. But now there have been a number of indictments made against Warren Jeffs, and there has finally been the elevation of Jeffs to one of the 10 most wanted men by the FBI.
In May 2006, Warren Jeffs became one of the FBI's 10 most wanted. But apprehending Jeffs wouldn't be easy. Upon taking over leadership of the FLDS, Warren Jeffs directed the construction of a 1,700-acre compound outside El Dorado, Texas. The centerpiece is a fortress-like temple, a huge white beacon